Welcome to Mishna Mondays. We've been holding this space for Mishna study all year, and we're closing off with a couple of classes from some of our, I'll just say it one more time, some of our young scholars. And we have like a really fine scholar here today to teach. Most of you who have been coming with us know Hannah Jensen, and I'm really excited to learn some Torah from Hannah today. Hannah's a kind of a pillar, a central figure in our community at Ikar, and very beloved to me and to many of us. If you wanted credentials, she's in rabbinical school, but I think she would probably say that doesn't matter. She's just like a passionate Jew and lover of Judaism who does everything she does in this world, whether it be laning or tutoring or teaching or davening, with just excellence and passion. So I'm really excited to learn from Hannah today. With no further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Hannah.
Wow, thank you. That was so kind. Thanks. So excited to be here with you all. It's so strange to be in this position with all of you after we've all learned together, some of us many days a week for a year. So it's really a joy. And as maybe if you saw the title ahead of time, or if you are fans or not fans of the John Mayer song, Say What You Need to Say, maybe you got a sense of something about what we're going to be doing today. But we are going to be talking about speech today and talking in general. Maybe it's just because I love to talk and I want justification for that. So this is maybe a class to just justify my desire to talk a lot. I'm not sure. But before we start, I want to give you a little bit of background of how I got to this, and then we'll say a blessing and we'll get started. And before any of that, I want to thank Joe Schwartz for stepping in to help me do some admin stuff today because Andrea is off. It's a staff self-care day. So thank you, Joe. So grateful for that. And so when I was thinking about this, I started by thinking about Mishna and figuring out, okay, it's Mishna Monday. Where do I want to start? And I kept thinking about this Mishna in Pirkei Avot that talks about learning so much from silence, and that silence is actually the place where people get a lot of wisdom. And for whatever reason, instead that led me to thinking about, but what about talking? Okay, yeah, there's wisdom in silence, sure, okay, fine. But that's not good enough for me. I want to talk about talking. And so I started this whole thing because I was thinking about silence. And initially I thought maybe we'll talk about silence and we'll talk about speech. And then I decided, no, we're just going to talk about talking. So I give a lot of gratitude for that Mishna in Pirkei Avot for my inspiration for this class that runs completely counter to the idea that silence is wisdom, though there is lots of wisdom in silence. And I totally agree with that, but that's not the direction that we're going to go today. And I think as a group of Jews or Jewish adjacent people, we have a lot of experience of talking and of speech in general and of opinions and conversation. And that's so much of our love and joy, I think, for all of this. And so I wondered, how do we understand it? What does it mean to us, and where does it come from? And how can we look at our sources to understand some of the powers of speech, especially speech as creation and speech as transformation? Not just as talking for the sake of talking, but how does it actually work to transform something or transform us? And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to kind of take a meandering journey through some liturgy and some Talmud and some things like that along the way, some Psalms, and we'll see where we end up. So it's just an adventure for all of us. And I hope that these pieces of text just serve as inspiration and catalyst for thought and conversation and understanding. But I don't have a specific goal in mind. There isn't an answer. It's just a way to kind of reframe some of the things that we understand about speech and transformation. So with that, we're going to say a blessing, which actually is, you'll see, is very connected actually to some of the things we're going to talk about today. So we will start by saying this blessing out loud, and then we will jump in. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, let's do it. I am going to put a source sheet in the chat for you all. I think I did it correctly and it should be clickable, but you know, you never know for sure. So let me know if you need a different version of it. I will, as I have learned from Rabbi David Kasher, share my screen as well, but in case you want it, there it is. So we are going to start with some liturgy actually. And the way that some of the Sefaria stuff works is that I just used their version of it. It's not my favorite version to look at, but the text is the same. So if it looks unfamiliar, but you realize you do know it, it's because Sefaria only has certain options for certain things. That's neither here nor there. We're just going to go with that. So here we go. We are starting, if I can find it. Okay. We're starting at the beginning with Baruch She'amar. So Baruch She'amar is one of the early, maybe I should explain this before I'm sharing my screen. One of the blessings we say at the very beginning of our service in the morning, the beginning of Pesukei de Zimra, that leads into our morning service during the week and also on Shabbat. And we call it Baruch She'amar because those are the first two words of the blessing. And those words mean, blessed is the one who spoke. That's how it starts. And so we're just going to look at the beginning of it. And so the beginning of it says, Baruch She'amar v'haya ha'olam. Blessed is God who spoke and the world came into being, or the world was. It's a little hard to know how to translate it, but God spoke and the world came into being. That's the first action of creation is speech. And the rest of this paragraph, which is Baruch She'amar, goes into all of the different actions that God took, the different ways that we bless God in this space. But blessed is the God who spoke the world into being. And we can look, Kathy Kobayashi, our Breshit scholar, is not here, but we can look at the verses in Breshit itself and see what that means. What does it mean that speech was the first action? And most of you probably know this, at least God said, let there be light, and there was light. But here's the actual wording. Vayomer Elohim, God said. It's the same verb, Vayomer, that's here, Amar, She'amar. So we have the same thing. This is the first thing that happens. This is the third verse of the Torah. The third verse of the Torah says, God spoke, let there be light, and there was light. And here's another example, in case you want another one, a few verses later of the second day, God said, let there be this expanse in between the waters, separates the waters. God did it. God called it Shemaim, all these things. So here's the beginning. The beginning is speech. And that's where we're going to start today, is thinking about God spoke the world into being. And much like that understanding of God, we speak and things happen. The hope is that we use our speech in a way that is intentional, in a way that is productive and creative. Any initial thoughts about God speaking the world into being, or us saying this every day and what that means? Any thoughts? Bob, are you raising your hand? Great. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so interesting that you should start with that, because as you were giving the introduction, that was my first thought also was, and God said, let there be light. And I think I've thought about that in the past. I mean, the verse could just be, there was light. It didn't have to be, and God said, let there be light. God could have just created light, and that's the end of it. Similar with the other passages that you presented there. It didn't need to include that extra vocalization.
Yeah, great. I love that. And I love that we're on the same page this morning. So we'll see where, if we lead the same direction. That's great. Yeah. Do we need that? Could it just have said it happened? Payam.
Yeah, along the same lines. I mean, I've always found it curious, to whom did he speak? And, if there was nobody there, like, why did he even say it out loud, right? I mean, this is an omnipotent God who can snap his finger and but he needed the verbalization. So why does God need verbalization in essence?
Amazing. Great. Yeah. Who cares? If there's no one to hear it, if it doesn't change anything, why is there such an emphasis on it? I think that question is going to come up a lot today. So thanks for starting us out on that. And Matt, and then we'll keep going.
One of the things that I noticed is God said this and it happened, but then God saw that it was good. Because if it said God said it was good, that would be like God was making it good. but his seeing doesn't create, his words create. Because it's making a clarity there.
I love that. Thanks, Matt. Yeah. Oh, I see that Florine and Robert have their hands up. Okay, let's take these quickly, and then I want to keep going because there's a lot of stuff I want us to see if we can. Florine.
I think there's another meaning here in that they're not just Hebrew letters, that they came from inside the essence. They came through breath, they came through consciousness. And I think that's a different kind of creativity than when I write a poem. Although I would like it to go further, okay? But there's something with the true source, as opposed to just saying, there's the creation.
Yeah, thank you. Ever the poet in our classes. We're so grateful. You always have such a beautiful and delicate way of seeing these things. Robert, we'll come to you.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to the person who was talking about, he saw that it was good. And I think that's a very powerful thing to see that something is good. Because many times we do things, well, it's just okay. It's not no big deal. But God did it, and then he said it was good. And I think it's a kind of a role model for us to, when we look and say it's good, we feel differently than when we just do it and we kind of forget about it. It's a powerful,
Yeah.
say it's good.
Yeah, thanks. Great. Okay, so we already have a lot of ideas about this. There's so much to be said about all of this. And the next place I want to go is really disconnected from this in some ways, but it's all connected. And this is a story from the Talmud, or some kind of expression from the Talmud, I guess, that I first learned from Rabbi Cheryl Peretz. So I want to give her credit for that. And it's pretty straightforward. We'll just see what happens. So essentially, we're in Talmud Brachot, and the story goes that Rav Yehuda said, that Shmuel said, that someone who derives benefit from this world without a blessing, it's as if they enjoyed objects that were consecrated for the heavens, that were consecrated for God. Because it's stated that the earth and all that it contains are God's, the world and all those who live in it. So if you take things from this world without a blessing, you're stealing, in some sense, something from God. And so that's kind of crazy, maybe. I don't know. We'll see where this goes, but do people have thoughts just about that so far? What does it mean that to take something without blessing it, you're taking something that was consecrated for the heavens because everything in the world is God's? Any immediate reactions to that? Yeah, Rabbi Kasher, and then we'll keep, now there are a bunch of hands. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking that, the idea of owning something or stealing something, property itself that's not a physical idea, that's a conceptual idea. So what words do is introduce this notion that there might be a description of something, a claim on something, a way of thinking about something. And so if the world is created with words, perhaps it suggests that there's a kind of evaluative and categorizing property that God kind of infuses into the world from the start.
Love it. Great. Alexandra, do you have something about this too, or yours was from earlier? Either way, go for it.
So this might be a stretch, but that we are so focused on saying blessings and speaking good, and what God speaks to create is light, and that light creates makes light, and then darkness is off to the side. And I think I'm not expressing this well, but I think it's also something to do with the importance of not speaking the dark, not speaking Lashon Hara, and that the power of our words creates, period. So we can create the light or we can create the dark. So when we want to engage with God through any sort of physical activity or any physical thing that we take or absorb or consume, that to speak the light is like training us to separate the light from the dark, to not speak the Lashon Hara, to focus on the light, to stay on that path of creating that which is good.
Okay, great. So how does that train us in some sense to focus our energy a certain direction and avoid other potentially perilous ways? Great. Great. Okay, let's go back to it and see where it goes, because I think it's unexpected, or maybe just to me. So what we learn next is that Rabbi Levi brings a contradiction to them, because he says, wait a second, it does say the earth and all it contains are God's, Lashem haaretz umloa, but it also says elsewhere in Psalms that the heavens are for God, but it also says, Hashemayim Shemayim Lashem, but it also says, V'ha'aretz natan livnei adam, but God has given the earth to humanity, that God gave us the earth. So what do you mean if we don't say a blessing before we derive benefit from something from the world, that we're taking something that was consecrated for the heavens? How do we understand these two pieces? Because they seem on their face to be contradictory. How do we see those as potentially not contradictory? And as you can see, they have simple solution, but anyone have your own ideas of a solution before we see their solution? Great, let's just see it. Oh, Yonatan, yeah.
Oh, sure. God gave us the world conditionally, and that condition was that the blessing be made, right? We don't just take, we acknowledge.
Great. Yeah. And that's mostly where we go. What they say is, there's no contradiction. That's not the issue. The issue is that the earth is God's before a blessing is recited. And that when you say a blessing, you transform that for yourself. And so it's the process of speaking out that blessing that moves something from being God's and from this situation of taking something that isn't yours to this experience of borrowing or receiving or taking something that now is yours because of this act of speech that transformed it for you. So we did this in some ways. If we think about blessing over studying Torah at the beginning of this class, that too is something that's God's. The Torah, study, all of that. And by blessing it, we make it accessible to us. We make it so that we're allowed to engage with it. Another really, I think, tangible version of that is food blessings. If you're someone who says blessings before you put a piece of food in your mouth, everything that's of the earth, all of the food that you're consuming is actually God's. All of that produce, all of those things. But by saying a blessing before it, you transform it and you're allowed to receive it, and you're no longer taking something that isn't yours. That's what they offer us. What do you think? Anyone who hasn't shared yet, I'm going to wait for you first, and then I'm happy to come back to people who have shared already. But anyone out there who hasn't shared yet, who has some idea about this? Okay, Payam.
I mean, but there is the fact that not everything has a blessing. You know, like the rabbis in essence created shakol for the things that didn't have blessings. So to the rabbis, it isn't a problem. But if you look at the Torah itself, there's a lot of food, specific everyday things we need that don't have blessings. Like, does water have a specific blessing when you drink it?
Yeah. And are you set? Does that not work for you, Payam, to have that catch-all blessing? Like the rabbit, what Payam's talking about is that there's this blessing, shakol niyeh bidbaro, that we use for all the foods and water and things that you consume that don't have a specific blessing for them. And so you say that instead. You don't think that counts, Payam, or what do you think?
I mean, it's never worked for me. I don't say it personally because I think there's a delineation, like there's a reason, there's a specific blessing for bread or etc. in the Torah versus for something that isn't, you know. But I think it's a sort of circumvention to say shakol, to say, well, everything should have a blessing, but in reality, it doesn't.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, not everything has a blessing. You're right. And maybe for some people more than others, having one that kind of is a catch-all works for them, and for you, not so much. I hear that, definitely. Robert.
Yeah, I think this is a very profound thing. It's very touching to think, you know, all this stuff that's around me, it's not actually not my possession. It belongs to God. And I think it's it's a very deep thought. I take so much for granted. Okay, the food on my table, my house, my car, it's all mine. No, there's another thought. These possessions you take for granted, actually, they don't belong to you. They're just there, and if you want to make it yours, you say a blessing. I think it's a beautiful thing to transfer it from one domain to another. Make that conscious, a very profound thought, I think, for me.
Great. Thank you, Robert. I think it really is a transformative way to think about it. If you haven't thought about it that way, that what does that shift look like? And how do you enact that simply by using the words that you have to be able to do that? And it's so surreal sometimes, the small things that someone realized at some point would be as transformative as they are for so many of us. Andrea, let's hear from you.
I think there's a whole lot of things in the world that we, besides food, there's a whole lot of things in the world that are created by God that we don't have a blessing for. I mean, there's a blessing for seeing the ocean, you know, but there's not a blessing for waking up in the daylight, you know, well, not a specific one. And you know, there's not a blessing for the water and the earth working together to make, you know, plants grow. And you know, there's many more things for which there's not a blessing than there are things for which there is a blessing. And so if you listen to Rabbi Levy, I think that was his name, then you're stealing from God all the time. And so I don't find that a very good explanation.
Wow, Andrea. Okay, I love it. Throwing a wrench in all of it. Great. Great. Anyone else with Andrea on that? This doesn't work for them. This doesn't work. This isn't going to help. This did not change your life to hear this. And there are too many things for which there aren't blessings. So what are we talking about? We're stealing all the time. Anyone else on board with that? No. People are saying no. Okay. I support you, Andrea. I like it. I'm here for it. Love a challenge. Great. Okay. I hadn't thought about it that way. What do we do about all the times that there isn't a blessing? And unlike with food, there isn't a catch-all blessing. So what do you do? Great question. Great question. Alexandra.
I also think it's about transforming ourselves through the blessing to be able to receive it. And so we're transforming the thing, and we're also transforming ourselves by saying it to access that level of godliness. But I also like that the catch-all blessing is about words, that everything was created according to his word. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thing too.
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. So Alexandra's mentioning that the blessing that Payam mentioned before, the kind of catch-all blessing for all of these food-related blessings, is shehakol niyed bidvaro. And that word at the end, bidvaro, is God's word. So again, we have a reference to speech, that everything was created by God's word, by some kind of speech, that's what it all comes back to. Even the things that we don't have a specific blessing for, they all have that same origin in some way. It's all from speech. That's a great connection. Thanks for that. Yonatan.
Yeah, I really want to build on what Robert said, and maybe allay Andrea's concerns a little bit, but the mechanism here, you know, when you're talking about my house, my car, and so on, you don't get to just bless your house and it suddenly becomes your house, right? Or bless your car and it suddenly becomes your car. You get to bless, you know, this cup of tea and then shortly thereafter consume it, right? This is not a loophole to gain possession of the world. This lays down the rule that we are here to live in the world and we're here to enjoy the world. And sometimes that includes consuming parts of the world, but at no point do we really become owners. We're always passers-by, right, in the world that God owns.
Yeah, thank you. It's there's something about the way you put that, it was very calming for me. Like some sense of, it's all God's anyway. Like we're really just passing through. And these moments of acknowledgement of that, these moments of attempting to borrow something doesn't change the reality, which is it's still God's and we know that. So having the right blessing or not, saying the right blessing or not, that doesn't change. It's great. Jen.
I guess I was just thinking of the fact that just because there isn't a prescribed blessing doesn't mean that there's not a way of blessing something or of being thankful for something. And so, I mean, we have language, right? We have the words, we have the structure given to us, but I mean, we use it. And I mean, not just personally, I think it's something that we use to be thankful for things, to acknowledge things to God and from God, even if there's not a specific blessing that's prescribed to us. And maybe, I mean, not maybe, but there is meaning in that, you know, and possibly more meaning in that because nobody told us specifically what to say. We were choosing to say it. That's all.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I think that so much of what we've looked at so far, at least, are specific ways to think about saying specific words that need to be said a certain way. And where's the space for the rest of it? For all the things that there aren't prescribed blessings for. And I think it's a great point that the liturgy that we have, the text that we have, only goes so far. And there are lots of ways that as our world evolves and as we evolve, some of the things don't really click for us in the same way. Or some of the things that we think, why isn't there a blessing for this? They didn't know there would have needed to be a blessing for that. And I think of all of the people I know who have created new rituals and blessings for things that they've experienced that definitely 2000 years ago didn't happen. So there's no way to have had language for that until we had it.
Right. And also, like, it kind of, I don't want to say that it's more meaningful or less meaningful, but I think there's something, to me, and maybe this is wrong, there's something negative to the thinking that, okay, well, if there wasn't a prescribed blessing for it, then you shouldn't say anything, you know, like, isn't the goal to be thankful and to acknowledge and to, you know, and to do and to create. And if we're not using language to do that, just because it wasn't written, like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it gets tricky, right? Because in the realm of blessings specifically, I think some people really feel like I need to say the words that are in front of me. And I need to say the things that were given to me, that were transmitted over all these generations. And what's fixed, what's keva is what I do. And that's important. And then, but sometimes then what happens when you get stuck somewhere and you want to bless something and you don't have the exact right blessing? Do you say what Chaim says about the blessing over the rest of the food? Like, I'm not doing it because I'm not convinced by it. Or do you create your own, or do you find a way to engage with it that you feel like you can use language to acknowledge something in a way that feels Jewish and meaningful for you and isn't already prescribed? And I think that gets a little hairy. Where are the lines of I have to do the thing that I have received and this is the extent of that? And where does that end versus the realm of, yeah, but the spirit of that is say a blessing, and I can say a blessing whether I have the words for a blessing or not. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a great thing for us to think about. Joel.
So earlier, somebody said that by God saying, you know, he said, let there be light, and he saw that it was good. It's an act of acknowledgement or delineation or something like that. And there are things that happen in the world that one, to various extents, acknowledges or doesn't quite acknowledge, that in some sense are important, that you witnessed something happening. So several years ago, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin noticed that people who are caught in traffic because there's a fire engine or, you know, an ambulance pass, tend to get annoyed, right? They have to pull over, they have to wait while this other stuff goes through. And he said, you should delineate that, and you should notice that, because it's important that they get through ahead of you, that they're doing something in the world that that is good, right? And so kind of building on that, there's a bracha that, or there's an expression that you say when you learn that somebody's pregnant, and you say b'sha'a tova, that the birth should happen at a good hour, at a propitious hour, right? And so I just, whenever there's a fire engine or an ambulance or something going by, I've started saying b'sha'a mehera, that this should happen at a swift hour. It should happen quickly, so that the people who are on their way to do good in the world should, that it should be, it should happen. And it's not a bracha, but it comes out of a need to acknowledge, to delineate, and not to fall back on routine behavior like, uh-oh, so I'm going to be late because all the traffic pulled over or something like that. So that's just an observation on my part.
Yeah, no, what an amazing reframing of that experience, Joel. And it connects so much, I think, to what Jen was just saying about creating your own language to acknowledge something that feels worth acknowledging. And that part of what you've done with that is reclaimed something that otherwise was bothering you or bothering other people or whatever. And instead you found a way to make it sacred. And is that not what so much of this is about? Is how do we create the sacred in this profane experience, or in these mundane experiences of being human? How do we find holiness in that? How do we find sacredness in that? And so much of that comes from speaking
words, right? From speaking. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's one of our most instinctual ways to mark events, mark passage of time, mark experiences, is to speak about them or speak of them as they're happening. And I just really love the idea of channeling that kind of wish and energy toward whatever this urgency is around you, and acknowledging that this too is good and should happen in its right way and time. That's great. Any other thoughts about this specifically before we move into our next text, which I think, Jen, I think you'll like it, but we'll find out. Yeah, Robert, go ahead. You're muted, actually.
Yeah, this whole conversation that Jen brought up about making our own blessings, I think it's very important, even if we don't have something there. So it brings up to mind an event that happened to me 20 years ago. I was just taking a walk around the neighborhood, not really thinking much. And an elderly lady passed me, and I didn't know her. And she just looked at me right in the eye, and she said, "Bless you," and walked on. And I felt this tremendous sense of blessing sort of descended on me. And I thought, wow, this is such a powerful feeling. What just happened? That there's this like spiritual feeling just penetrated all the way through me. And I remembered that for 20 years. I still remember that and thinking, this was not made up by the rabbis. It's just this elderly lady passed me by. And I think these are things that happen, and we can create them ourselves. And we don't have to follow the rabbis. I just have to say that Andrea has sometimes accused me of creating my own religion. But anyway, I think, yeah, we have to make our religion our own somehow. It has to belong to us. We have to feel it. And so I think creating our own blessings is a very important thing to do.
Wow. Yeah. That story is so incredible. That tiny moment that you've carried with you for 20 years, and that she maybe hasn't, who knows? Like, it just, maybe that's how she is and operates in the world. But to think about that tiny utterance of speech that you've held this long, that's the power that we're talking about. That's what speech can do for us, is the right 2 words from a stranger 20 years ago you can carry with you forever. And just these little things, it's not always this overly thought out, complicated, really long situation. It's just a moment in time, or a word or 2 words that really are really formative for us.
Yeah.
And next I want to look at a text about someone who did exactly that, created her own words and her own acknowledgement of her situation. I saw that Yonatan's baby, Chana Adina, is here, which is great, because I'm here. So we're going to look at the story of Chana, for whom she and I are named. And many of you probably know, at least in broad strokes, the story of Chana, who was unable to have a child. And so she ended up, she was crying and wailing and praying. And this priest came up to her and thought that she was drunk, because it seemed like she was just mumbling to herself. And she tried to explain, that's not what's going on. I am in deep grief and agony about the fact that I can't have a child, and I'm just praying to God. And she's really one of the first times we ever hear of someone praying to God in that kind of way. And also, to Jen's point, really using her own language for it. And she is creating for herself a way to express this deep, deep trauma that she's feeling about her experience. And it turns out that we actually get 4 halachot, we get 4 Jewish laws, we get 4 customs about prayer from the story of Chana, which is kind of amazing, because we don't have a lot of stories of prominent women who have influenced our practice in that way. And so in Talmud Brachot, we hear about the different ways of prayer that we've learned from Chana. And we're just going to look, I brought all of them, but we're really just going to focus on 1.5 of them today. But the way that she prayed changed everything for us as Jews now. And so if we look at that, it comes from Brachot 31. And so here are some of the things that we learned from her. One is that she spoke in her heart, her lips moved and her voice could not be heard. Ellie thought she was drunk. This is all we know already. So from the fact that it says Chana spoke in her heart, the halacha says that when you pray, you have to focus your heart on the prayer. And then the next one is the one that is most relevant to what we are talking about, which is only her lips moved. And the halacha from that is that when you pray, you have to enunciate the words with your mouth, which is probably familiar to some or many of you. But you can't just contemplate it in your heart. It's not enough to just feel the thing. It's not enough to just think about the thing. It's not enough to just exist at shul. It's not enough to just have someone nearby praying. You have to physically yourself move your mouth and say the words. And the other thing that it says is that you're not allowed to raise your voice, that it should be quiet. Here they say silent, which isn't exactly true. We know from elsewhere in the Talmud that the way that it's described is that you should move your mouth and say these words soft enough that you can hear them, but not loud enough that the person next to you can hear them. And so there is this understanding of volume, but what the critical part is that you can't be silent. That's not how it works. If you're just thinking about it, that's not enough. That what she did that was radical enough in some way to be codified in this way is she moved her mouth. She said the things, she mumbled the things. She made sure that she was speaking into the world and to God exactly what she needed or wanted or hoped for. And we still pray that way. We still think about it that way. And I hear all the time in lots of different contexts, people teaching and reminding people that that's part of prayer. Prayer is verbal. Prayer is somewhat vocalized. It isn't just, I'm thinking about something. And we get that from her. We get that from someone who just created her own, as you said, Jen, language and blessing and prayer in a moment of need. And that's our paragon for so much of it. Thoughts about that? Payam.
I think it goes into the delineation between sound and words. Because, you know, we have sound, especially like I don't speak fluent Hebrew. I don't understand it. So to me and a lot of people, it sounds, but there isn't like a word or like meaning, you know, associated with that sound. And I think this is really powerful that says it's just the sound itself that can have the power, and that, you know, we can give our own meaning to that sound. So I think, like, you know, because we forget there's a difference in sound and word.
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't thought about it that way. And I think you're right. What is it? And I think what that makes it more accessible in some way, that you have to express something, you have to vocalize something, but that if you don't totally know all the words and things in the right way and the whatever, that maybe it's okay. That's not as much the importance of, is your heart in the right place? Is your mind in the right place? Are you focused on the goal of expressing this desire, expressing this need, expressing this collective wish or hope, and that the words that you use maybe aren't the point, as much as the fact that you're doing it and that you're doing it in this intentional way and you're doing it out loud. And that's back to Jen's point about making it your own, that maybe the prayers in front of you, because you don't know Hebrew or because they don't resonate for you, that those aren't always the way in for you, but that you still find a way to express what you need. Alexandra.
I really like what Payam said. I do believe very much in the importance of sound and the resonance of sound that even changes our tissue, because we're all water, and the power of the Aleph Bet and the sonic resonance. My point was sort of to the opposite, which is I think that this story also, and I agree with both sort of opposites, that I think this story and the rules made up because of this story sort of put a fence around prayer, in my opinion, as well. I think prayer is a muscle, and that we don't need to verbalize it or make our lips move in order for God to hear our direct thoughts to God, but that it is a muscle and that there is an importance of the focusing ourselves element to it. But I don't think that prayer requires, I think it's more a tool for ourselves, the idea of moving our mouths, than the aspect of the potency of the prayer itself. Like, God can hear our direct thoughts to God. We don't need to move our mouths to make them God aware that we're praying.
But Alexandra, that's the whole point of the class, that everything is important. You have to read everything. What do you mean?
I mean that, but if my thoughts are very clear to God in my mind, like if I say in my mind, so for example, I don't know who, but I loved the example, I can't see everyone on my screen, so I forget who said the beautiful story about what they say to
Joel. It was Joel.
Yes, Joel, yes. So in my mind, I say, when I hear a siren, I say, God, please bless those for whom the bells toll and those tolling the bells. That's what I say in my mind. I don't mouth it. I don't speak it out loud. I don't whisper it. And I do believe that God hears me. These are words in my head.
Yeah, no,
and
totally.
That has potency too.
I'm just giving you a hard time. I love that you brought up that. Justify it. It's great. Yeah, no, I love that. Rabbi Kasher.
I also wanted to build on Payam's comments, which I thought were illuminating. And just remind me that once we enter this realm of speech and the role of speech in our tradition and theology, which of course, as you're suggesting, goes all the way back to the beginning, then I think, you know, part of what happens, you know, in that theology is that you begin to divide up. Well, okay, so what parts of speech, like thought has to come before speech. So there's a movement there, and you need, you know, vocalization, that's a part of speech. So sing, and then singing is a form of speech. Like once we've done some of this work of not like sanctifying, but also imbuing this potency to imbuing speech with this potency, then we can think about, okay, so what about you know, what's the role of whispering, or what's the role of vocalizing, or what's the role of singing, or what's the role of the thought that turns in, like lots of different parts that all I think become important then in, you know, all of those acts of moving from idea to articulation have their significance in this scheme along with speech.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's great. And that also, I think, works really well with Alexandra's point about if I have this thing that I say in my head when a certain thing happens, that has gone somewhere from thought towards speech, because it's a kind of rhythm at this point. It's something that's been repeated as a mantra that she definitely has constructed almost as speech, but hasn't quite said out loud. And where does that fall on a spectrum instead of this black and white? Either you said it out loud correctly or you didn't. That's great. Bob.
Yeah, so my thought taps into, I think, what you're saying, and I think articulated also by Rabbi Kasher. And you know, I was thinking, you always have that stream of consciousness in your head that's like, you know, I'm thinking about it this way or that, or I was just thinking of, you know, when we say Vidui, the high holidays, and we go through this whole list, and I know that like my mind is saying, it's like, well, that's something that's not really relevant to me, or this one's really relevant. I have that like stream of consciousness, but once you articulate something and say it out loud, it's more like, I think as several people have been saying, you go from this jumbled way of thinking to actually saying it and owning it more directly.
Yeah, that experience is so familiar to me of Yom Kippur. You're like reciting all of these transgressions. You're like, not me, oh me, not me, for sure.
But I don't say that part out loud.
No, of course. You got to be careful about which parts you say out loud. Florine, and then Matt, and then I want to get to our last text.
Oh boy. I really have a problem with this because—
Oh, great. Tell us.
Because what has happened to me over the years, and I think it's from almost 20 years of studying Kabbalistic practices, I will see a word or I will mouth a word, and I will go immediately, if it catches me, into an imagery of sorts, and I will meditate on that word, and I will go bye-bye during the service. I'm not there. I'm already communicating with the divine on some kind of stream of, I don't know what to call it. And so I don't need to say the word anymore. And I don't want somebody to tell me I have to go back and keep repeating all the words in the prayer when I don't get anywhere with that prayer.
Yeah. Well, you may just be a little more elevated than the rest of us, Florine.
No. I practice. I had a good teacher, okay. But the point is, maybe that's just the way I work.
For
it
sure.
has to do with the elevation. It just may be the way this works.
Yeah.
My soul talks that way.
Yeah, it reminds me of what Jen said at the top a little bit about using your own language versus the language in front of you, that it doesn't always resonate. And I think it's really important for you to bring that up, that it's not always, oh, I said every word in the Siddur, I can check off praying for the day. That's not it at all. And I think that that's also what I was saying a little bit about Chana and relating to what Payam was saying about, it's not necessarily the exact words or the right thing, but what are you able to articulate? And I guess what you're bringing to that is maybe it's not that I'm even speaking any words, whether it's the ones in the Siddur or not, but I'm having a spiritual experience and I'm having a connection with the divine. And isn't that the point?
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I love that. Thank you, Florine. Matt, can you do it quickly and then we can get to this last text?
Yes, I can, and well, but this is the opposite side, because I think the Torah itself is very clear that speech and breath and soul are intimately connected and are very much close to the same thing. And the Torah never has us, I don't think ever, or maybe once or twice, tells us what someone is feeling or tells us what they are thinking. It is about what they say. And for the Torah, that's what matters, that it is our breath and our speaking and what people say that does. We're not told Moses thought or Abraham was angry. So I'm not saying I agree with that.
Yeah.
I like Florine's position and Alexandra's position, but I'm saying the Torah disagrees.
Yeah. Great. Well, you really teed me up very well for this last text. So I appreciate your service. Thank you. Yeah. And I always love having contradictory perspectives, because what else are we doing other than that, other than all of us having very different understandings. So this last text is also from the Talmud, from a different part of the Talmud, Kedushin, and it's one of my favorite pieces of Talmud. It's just a little story. And so let's look at it in our last few minutes together. So this is from Kedushin 49b. The Gemara tells a story that there was a man who sold his property with the intention of making Aliyah, of going to Eretz Yisrael. But when he sold his property, he didn't tell anyone that that was his intention. But that was his intention. So he ends up not going to Israel. And then he wants to take the sale back, because his goal was this very lofty, holy goal to go to Israel. And so he should be able to get it back. He should be able to change his mind. And Rava says, excuse me, no, you did not tell anyone that that's why you were doing it. As far as we knew, you did it just because you felt like selling it or for some other not holy reason. So you didn't tell us you were going to Israel. And that is in the category of Divarim Shebalev, things that are in the heart, things that are of the heart. And those matters that are in your heart, they're not matters at all. Einam Divarim. So Divarim is a weird word, things, matters, words. But the point is, we can't read your mind. You thought you knew that your goal was to go to Israel, but you never told us. And now you expect us to just believe that that was your intention. You have to say it. It's not enough to think it. It's not enough to know it. It's not enough to dream it and plan your whole life around it. You have to say it out loud, and you have to say it into the world. Those are the things that matter, because Divarim Shebalev Einam Divarim. They're not things. I mean, what? When I first learned this, I felt like it changed my life. Yonatan, let's start with you.
Oh, I think this is such a great text, and I'd never seen it before. So thank you for bringing it in.
Is it not the best thing you've ever seen? Amazing. Okay.
It's great. No, it's fantastic. And it speaks to the fact, as trivial as this is to say, that words have objective meaning and thoughts don't, right? And this reminds me of one of my favorite Jewish laws, which is, the Torah takes vows very seriously, and you don't have to say, I vow to do such and such. You just have, I'm going to go pick up I'll go water your plants tomorrow, right? Or that's a vow, Jewishly speaking. But Jewish law has a way of dealing with coercion, which is that if you are coerced into taking a vow, you can write on a piece of paper, I'm being coerced into taking this vow, and you can put that piece of paper away and never bring it out. But if the day comes where it's safe to bring it out, you can, and then you can annul that vow. And even though nobody saw those words besides you, and they have to believe you that you're the one who wrote that note, but point just being like, you need to take the subjective reality of your feeling of your world and put it into the objective reality of words, knowing that can't contain all of your subjective reality.
Yeah, great. Yeah, something gets lost you can't quite ever express everything that you can think or imagine, but that it still matters, because that's the way that you engage with the world. That's how you have any interface with other people. Anyone who hasn't shared yet today in our last minute or so, and would love to hear from anyone who's just been sitting with any of this in the last hour and wants to say something. Okay, Payam, we're coming to you.
You just answered my question from the beginning of why did God have to vocalize the creation of the universe and the creation of light? This just answers that, because even for God himself, he needs to say it out loud for it to happen. This is like really powerful.
Wow, Payam, I feel like my life's mission is complete. I don't feel like I've never seen you so like happy, impressed, like accepting the situation. I feel like you're always pushing, and I love it. But I love that I somehow satisfied you in some tiny way. I'm so excited. Yeah, Payam's totally right. This answers his question at the beginning, and answers maybe a lot of our questions. Why does even God have to speak the world into being? Because that's the only way that it can happen. Thinking it isn't enough, wondering about it, imagining it, dreaming it. Something else has to happen. There's another step. There's something in between those things. And I think for us in general, and this comes back to my own struggle with the idea that silence is wisdom, is that speech is also wisdom. That there's something about our ability to try to express what's going on internally for us into words that other people can hear and understand and receive. There's wisdom in that. And it's a lifelong journey to do it well. And we all struggle and we all fall short. And there are so many ways that we say the wrong thing, or we thought we told someone the thing that we meant to tell them and we didn't, or we thought it was so obvious because it was so clear to us, but that's not enough. And there's something about saying the words out loud that make them real. So I just want to leave us with that today. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been such a joy, and let's learn again soon.